Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting of March 8th, 2016. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam President. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos present. President Breed?
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Campos?
Present.
Campos present. Supervisor Cohen?
Present.
Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell not present. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell present. Supervisor Kim? Kim not present. Supervisor Marr? Marr not present. Supervisor Peskin?
Present.
Peskin present. Supervisor Tang?
Present.
Tang present. Supervisor Wiener?
Present.
Wiener present. Supervisor Yee? Yee present. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any communications?
There are none to report, Madam President.
Colleagues, are there any changes to the February 2nd, 2016 regular board meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve those minutes? Motioned by Supervisor Campos, seconded by Supervisor Avalos. Colleagues, can we take that without objection? Without objection, those meeting minutes will pass after public comment unanimously. Madam Clerk, can we please call the next item?
Today's special order at 2 p.m. is the appearance by our Honorable Mayor Edwin Lee. There being no questions submitted from the eligible districts, the odd districts, the Mayor may address the board for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome to the chamber, Mr. Mayor. You have the floor.
Thank you, President Breed. And good afternoon, supervisors, and also to the members of the public that are here. I didn't receive any questions this month, but I'm going to take the opportunity to address our city's response to homelessness. I know that earlier today there was a media event calling homelessness a, quote, crisis. But that event didn't offer any solutions, no new philanthropic partnerships, no new sites for navigation centers, and no path forward. But it did offer rhetoric. And in my years of public service, supervisors, I've never governed in search of headlines. I do believe in real results. And I know that those who are homeless also count on that. Back in December 3rd of last year, I too said homelessness had reached a crisis point, but my response included substance. Substance like 522 new units of permanent supportive housing in the last 7 months. Expanding the national shelter model my administration created, the Navigation Center. Ending chronic homelessness for veterans, a new 180-bed shelter at Pier 80, El Nino shelters to cover for 700 people, thanks to the collaboration and cooperation of our Interfaith Council, helping hundreds of homeless people out of a public health emergency on Division Street and into shelter without having to make a single arrest. $20 million for a new bond funding for homeless shelters, creating a new coordinated homeless department, $1 billion funding commitment with a goal of subsidizing 8,000 homeless people by 2020. I've held several meetings with HUD Secretary Julian Castro and President Obama's homelessness director. And last month, I led a West Coast mayor's federal funding effort to get more resources to solve homelessness. So much we agree on. But I believe we have a vigorous disagreement over allowing people to inject heroin and meth to literally destroy their bodies and their minds in a city-funded shelter, as some have proposed. We should instead focus on expanding successful residential drug treatment facilities. Look, we need to build more navigation centers, and I share the frustration of those who are critical of how long our efforts are taking to bear fruit. But anger does not help, cooperation does. So to those who are actually interested in cooperating, genuinely willing to work together, we have a great opportunity. In the 6 months since I've announced our plans to double our navigation centers, I have received very cooperative responses from about 4 supervisors. You know who you are, and I want to thank you. You have demonstrated real leadership for the people in your district and for the city's homeless population. My administration has identified more than a dozen potential navigation center sites spread around the city and working with the interfaith community and city departments with surplus land. And today I'm announcing a new dedicated project manager, a partnership between our Hope Office and our Public Works Department with the sole focus of getting new navigation centers built as quickly as possible. We've already begun community meetings on what we hope will be our next 2 new navigation center sites, one near Pier 80 and one in the South of Market area. So supervisors, if you want to really help solve this, work with me, work with Public Works, work with the Human Services Agency, and certainly with our Public Health Department, and at least 4 of your colleagues who have already begun that work with me. Work with us to get these sites community buy-in. Work with us to make this happen. This, supervisor, is the true test of our resolve, and I hope you'll stand with us in the months ahead as we build these centers, as we staff them up, and as we give real help to our homeless people in need as they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, we will continue with our agenda. Madam Clerk, can you please read the consent agenda?
Items 1 through 13 are on consent. These items are considered routine. If a member objects, an item may be removed and considered separately.
Seeing no, Supervisor Wiener?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam President. I don't want to remove anything. I just want to make a comment specific to item 10, the legislation we passed unanimously last week to increase the tobacco purchase age in San Francisco from 18 to 21. As you probably saw in the press, and this is...
Supervisor Wiener,
yeah.
It would be appropriate to remove it for the consent agenda in order to discuss it.
Oh, it has to be removed to do that?
Yes.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I'll remove it.
So we'll remove item number 10, and on the remaining agenda, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Yee? Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen? Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The items are passed on the first reading, adopted, finally passed, and approved unanimously. Madam Clerk, please call item number 10.
Item 10 is an ordinance to amend the Health Code to prohibit tobacco retailers from selling tobacco products, including smokeless tobacco and electronic cigarettes, to persons aged 18, 19, or 20.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President, and my apologies for not severing it to begin with. Colleagues, last week we passed this important public health measure unanimously, and thank you for your support, and I look forward to passing it again unanimously today. As you probably saw, 2 days after we passed it, in an unexpected development, the State Assembly passed pending state legislation to increase the tobacco purchase age to 21. It was unexpected because tobacco measures have frequently died in the State Assembly. So this was a wonderful step forward, and the State Senate will take it up again this week. We don't know what the governor is going to do. I hope he will sign it. And this is the kind of law where being potentially preempted by the state can be a really good thing. We're monitoring this carefully. We don't know what's going to happen exactly, and when it comes to state legislation, it isn't over till it's over. And so I would like to move forward with this legislation. And of course, if the state passes legislation, we will evaluate whether our legislation is complementary or conflicting. And then if we need to suspend it or amend it, we will certainly do what is needed. But for now, I think it's important to move forward with this trend-setting legislation. And again, I want to thank you, colleagues, for your support.
Thank you. Colleagues, can we take this item? Same House, same call. Without objection, the ordinance is finally passed unanimously. Madam Clerk, can we go to our regular agenda with the first item?
Item 14 is an ordinance to amend the planning code to require conditional use authorization for the removal of any residential unit, whether authorized or unauthorized, with exceptions, units that have received prior planning approval, and single-family homes that are demonstrably unaffordable or unsound, and to amend the building code to require that notices of violation under the filing of an application to legalize an unauthorized unit in certain circumstances, and affirming the Planning Department's California Environmental Quality Act determination and making other appropriate findings.
Supervisor Tang?
Thank you. Last week I did not support this legislation, but since having more conversations with the planning staff, I am comfortable with supporting this today, so just wanted to, for the record, state that.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, can we do a roll call vote on the item?
On item 14, Supervisor Yee.
No.
Yee, no. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen? Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. There are 10 ayes, 1 no, with Supervisor Yee in the dissent.
The ordinance is finally passed. Item 15, please.
Item 15, resolution to authorize the Office of Contract Administration to enter into a multi-year contract with Golden Gate Petroleum to supply city departments with renewable diesel for the term of April 1st, 2016 through March 31st, 2019, in an amount not to exceed $60 million.
Roll call vote.
On item 16, Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener? Wiener, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 16 is a resolution to retroactively authorize the treasurer and tax collector to accept and expend a $315,000 grant from the Mott Foundation for expanding outreach and family engagement for kindergarten through college through August 31st, 2017.
Colleagues, can we take this resolution, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 17, resolution to approve the TAGSCO agreement for towing, storage, and disposal of abandoned and illegally parked vehicles in an amount not to exceed $65.4 million through March 31st, 2021, with the option to extend for up to 5 additional years.
Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you. I want to recognize the Budget Committee for their work on this measure. Since the Budget Committee had deliberated, we also had a hearing that was looking at fees and court fees and how they were impacting a lot of working people. And through that, we heard a lot about the towing fee and how difficult it is for people who are very low income or who are struggling economically to be able to pay for the fee, and how the inability to pay for the fee could lead to people losing their vehicles, not having ability to get to work, which often is beyond public transportation, and putting them in a cycle where they're actually not able to escape poverty or economic distress. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that we look at paring back these fees to actually make it easier for everyone to survive in San Francisco during our economic crisis. In 2009 and 2010, the Board of Supervisors had all of the fees of the city before us. I recall in Budget Committee that those years having pages and pages of fees that were ramped up in both years. And I don't think we've actually, as a city, recovered. And we actually have lowered fees now that our city is doing better economically. So it makes a lot of sense that we actually have a real discussion about what we're trying to do with our fees to actually recover costs, to actually bring more revenue in for the departments, to curb behavior that we don't want to see, or to sock it to residents. All of those things are things that happen and seem to be goals that we have as a city. It makes more sense that we have some clarity about those. And I think it makes sense to start soon, to start right away. We have before us the auto return administrative fee that's part of the whole contract that we have before us today. To me, it makes sense that we give the MTA a little bit more time to reassess these fees, still giving time to actually approve the contract before us before the expiration date of March 31st. And so I would like to see if it's a way that we can find some a lower fee cost that would sock residents much less than the towing fee currently does. And I realize, the tow is there for people who actually have an infraction or break the law. But I believe all of us make mistakes. I've made mistakes and had my car towed in the past. It really hurts. And I'm doing okay economically. Depending on your point of view, there are a lot of people who are doing much worse economically. For them, a tow would be devastating to their pocketbook and devastating to their ability to pay rent or stay in the city. So I would like to, after a short discussion on this measure, motion that we continue this item to next week to allow the MTA board to give us a better sense of what the administration fee can be. That way we could save residents some money in economic distress. It could very well be the MTA isn't prepared for that before our board meeting next week, so we might need to continue again, but I'd like to continue this for 1 week so we can have a greater discussion about how we could save a lot of residents in San Francisco economic distress.
All right, Supervisor Avalos has made a motion to continue this item 1 week to the meeting of March 15th, 2016. It's seconded by Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate many of the comments already made by my colleague, Supervisor Avalos. We did actually co-sponsor a hearing on municipal fines, of which tow-away fees were included in that discussion. And I think there has to be a greater overall conversation on this board as a legislative body to really consider how we generate revenue to pay for government services and what are the appropriate sources of revenue and how do we charge our residents for it. A $600 on average tow-away fee impacts our residents differently. And the penalization of that fee impacts our residents disproportionately. For some of us, it is an incredible inconvenience. For others, it hurts our monthly budgets. For others, it is a decision between paying rent and buying groceries or getting the car that you may need to get to work and to keep your family errands in order. And I just believe, and this is a comment that I made back in June when I voted against the 6-month extension of the auto return contract, that these fees are just too high. This is a topic that came up in our budget subcommittee meetings in 2011 and in 2012, where I've asked SFMTA to re-examine our administrative fees that have gone up 150% since Supervisor Avalos came on the Board of Supervisors. And yes, there's a time and place in which we can look at examining increasing fees, and certainly, the recession was one of those times. But now we are doing well again in terms of revenue. And again, I think the more political question is, what is the appropriate way to pay for government services and who do we charge for it? I think the cost recovery conversation is one that we've had with SFMTA for quite a while. I was quite surprised to learn that in cost recovery that we include things like painting curbs and also our director Ed Riskin's salary in cost recovery. I don't think we have a consistent policy for how we charge cost recovery, because the other time this came up is during the commuter shuttle bus debate in 2013, when I had also asked SFMTA, well, how did you come up with $1 per stop? And in that scenario, SFMTA tried to keep the program as affordable as possible. I'm not sure Ed Riskin's salary was included in that cost recovery. And so if we're going to do cost recovery, well, let's have a consistent standard of how we're going to do it. San Francisco should absolutely not be in the business of impoverishing our residents, and that is what we're doing by the singular mistake of towing their cars away. Yes, we want to regulate driver behavior. We don't want cars on the streets when there is street cleaning that keeps our neighborhoods clean and healthier, when we need to regulate traffic during rush hour. We have these rules in place for a reason. But we also should not be in the business of impoverishing our residents for a singular mistake. Nobody is trying to get their car towed. In fact, most people I talk to didn't understand the sign, missed an alarm. I mean, most people are trying to follow the rules and then get slapped with the $600 to $700 tow-away fee. I'd like to work with the SFMTA over the next 2 weeks with Supervisor Avalos and Peskin, one on reducing the administrative fee, which I think is exorbitant, and certainly the increase that we've seen over the last 8 years, I'm not sure has been justified. 2, I think that we need to look at the number of parking lots that we're renting. This is an issue that came up at our municipal fines hearing last week. Do we really need to have 2 parking lots to store our vehicles? 3rd, I'd like to look at the storage fee. For many residents, coming up with $600 to $700 on the day that their car gets towed is very challenging to do. And we read some of those stories in the Chronicle article that came out this morning. Perhaps we should give more time to our residents to come up with the money and not charge them additional fees for the storage, which in many ways is a sunk cost the moment their car arrives on the lot. Finally, I'd like to look at a hardship program. We really do have residents that simply cannot afford to pay this dollar amount. The city of Chicago has managed to figure out a way to do a hardship program. I know that it is challenging. SFMTA doesn't like to do income means testing, but I think that if we look at the Chicago model, there's a variety of factors that we can look at that people can submit as evidence that this is a form of hardship, either proof that they live in public housing, that they're on free and reduced lunch, that they're on food stamps, that their house was in foreclosure. I think there are multiple documents that can be submitted, which is what the city of Chicago does, to prove that this would be a hardship for you to pay. Finally, I would just add that we need to make this program as affordable as possible and still regulate behavior. I still think that it is there in place for a reason, but I just don't believe that what we're doing today is right or fair in terms of us impoverishing residents, again, to pay for our transit system. So I look forward to working with SFMTA and my colleagues on reforming the system before we vote this contract in.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim, and I would like to associate myself with your comments, but I want to also add that one of the things you forgot to mention is the actual ticket that folks get, which adds to the expense of the towing fee. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm very sensitive to the fees that are charged to people whose cars are towed. I think our towing fees, when you look at the aggregate of what people are often required to pay, are quite high, and it does create a hardship for a lot of people. And I think it is a good idea to take a look at how we can lower these towing fees. Colleagues, as you'll recall from last year, my office worked for several years with the MTA and with Auto Return, but really with the MTA, to figure out how we could provide relief to the owners of cars that are stolen and then towed. Because we had a situation where people who did nothing at all wrong, their car was simply stolen and then dumped in San Francisco and then towed, and then they may not find out where it is for days or even a week, and all of a sudden they're hit with $1,000, $1,500 in fees and fines, which could be worth more than the value of the car, and so some people would actually abandon their cars. And so we work closely with the MTA, methodically, in a way to provide relief to the owners of these towed, stolen cars, and also to minimize the financial impact on the MTA. And I want to thank MTA for working with us. MTA did work with us over a period of years. It wasn't a last-minute request when the contract came up. We worked for several years, passed a resolution of this board laying out our exact position before contract negotiations began, and MTA listened to us and heard us and came back with a really solid change. And I have had multiple people approach me on the streets to thank the Board of Supervisors and the MTA for providing that relief, saying my car got stolen, and I had to pay very, very little to get it back, and I appreciate that you guys did this. So with that said, I am sympathetic to people who get their car towed and then struggle to pay. I'm also sympathetic to the needs of Muni riders, many of whom do not own a car, and who need to have reliable transit service to get to work, to get to school, to get to the doctor. And when Muni is not adequately funded and when service suffers, there are a lot of people who do not own cars who have significant hardships. And that's why I, and I know others, have focused so extensively on making sure that we are protecting the money that Muni has for service, for bus operations, for rail operations, and increasing the amount that Muni has. We know that Muni has a structural deficit. We know that for the 2017-2018 fiscal year, Muni already has a $25 million projected operating deficit. So the choices that we make here and that the MTA board makes in response to this board to reduce the towing fees, while that may be a really good thing and something that I could very, very much get behind, that means money that will come out of Muni operations, directly out of Muni operations, and that means directly out of bus service, directly out of subway service, directly out of maintenance. That's exactly where that money comes from. And I want to make sure that we as a Board of Supervisors, when we are making policy choices, like the very legitimate policy choice of trying to lower towing fees, we're not doing it at the expense of Muni, and that we're actually paying for those choices and understanding that there are trade-offs when it comes to decisions like lowering towing fees. So today I am making a drafting request to the City Attorney's Office and to the Controller for a supplemental appropriation from the general fund to the MTA to compensate the MTA for any reduction in revenue that the MTA experiences, that Muni experiences, as a result of any towing fee change that this board demands of the MTA. Colleagues, we should be putting our money where our mouth is. If we're going to make this demand, we should find a way to pay for it and not just take the money out of Muni operations on which so many of our residents rely. So I have heard various ideas of what this reduction may look like. We asked MTA to calculate what the cost would be. The high end of the cost that we have heard is $3.2 million per year. And so the supplemental I'm requesting is for $3.2 million as a general fund contribution to Muni to make Muni whole. Of course, if it ends up being less than that, I'll adjust the supplemental to reflect the ultimate amount. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, when I first became a member of this board, the administrative fee on a tow was $25. When I left 8 years later, that had risen to $50. That was 7 years ago. It has, in the last 7 years, risen by over 430%. That is just frankly outrageous. And while I do understand that Muni has a need for operations, I also note that we have attempted to create, at least some supervisors, flexibility in Muni's ability to use certain fees, like the old transit impact development fee, today the transportation sustainability fee, not just for capital, but also for operating. There are many ways that the MTA can address this issue without soaking those 42,000 unfortunate individuals who have their cars towed. And I think that the public policy questions raised by Supervisor Kim as to having a uniform policy, and by the way, 100% cost reimbursement is a very dangerous thing for this city and the MTA and this body over things that we have control over to do. Because if you're over the 100% mark, it's no longer a fee, it's an illegal tax that has not been approved by the voters.
I think out of an abundance of caution, we should never put it at 100%. I think Supervisor Kim raises some very good questions. How can you justify an 87% administrative fee? How can you justify an 87% administrative fee? And the answer is it's loaded up with all sorts of things, including the cost of those tows from individuals who have had their cars stolen that do not appropriately, responsibly belong there. Listen, this new contract, which nobody has an issue with relative to the operator, relative to the RFP, relative to the new way it's structured, which is as a management fee, why are we paying and subsidizing the cost of various MTA staff when that is what the management fee is for? So I question why a portion of the director of the MTA's salary is being passed on to these individuals who get their cars towed. But objectively, 87% administrative fee is usurious, and we should all recognize that. And I'm delighted that in the next week or two, the MTA will rethink this wrong-headed policy and bring those fees down for those unfortunate individuals who have their cars towed.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, President Bree. There's been some interesting issues raised in this discussion that wasn't raised at the Budget Committee, and I guess one of the things I wanted to hear is some response from MTA in terms of some of the issues that have been brought up. Is that possible? Through the chair, through the president.
Is there a representative here from MTA?
Good afternoon, Supervisor. Steve Lee from MTA. I'm here to answer any questions that you have.
Supervisor Yee, you had a specific question, or you?
Okay, there's been several issues raised in terms of the administrative fee, and some of it were specific issues that were raised.
Sure.
I don't know, were you sitting in here when it was raised, or do
I've
you
heard
need to
everything,
repeat
sir.
it? Okay, so can you answer? Can you have a response to those issues? For instance, do we need to charge up to 100%, as Supervisor Peskin alluded to? It might be dangerous. Should we recoup? Again, without knowing what we're talking about, what percentage we're talking about that goes into the executive director's salary, things like that is unknown to me.
Sure.
So can you answer those?
Absolutely. The 100% recovery, cost recovery sort of methodology with regard to the administrative fee was I would say, MTA policy that was implemented in 2010 with regard to this program. So the 100% cost recovery includes all of the costs to run this program. With regard to the 86% Supervisor Peskin, mentioned, is the overhead rate that is applied to the direct costs. And the overhead rate or overhead percentage includes in it salaries for HR, accounting, our insurance, our rent, the fuel costs that is included in parking control officers, GO4s, the rent that is paid for at the enforcement building. My costs and my staff costs are not included in direct charges, so all of this is considered overhead.
Okay, well, I guess it would have been helpful if we. Do you have during the budget presentation? There weren't really specific line items to those that I was aware of. Do you have those?
Certainly. The MTA costs related to this program, the entire program costs $24.1 million. Of that, 12.3 is the contractor fees that are included with regard to fixed fees and the variable costs. $9.1 million is MTA costs, and 2.7 is rent. Of the MTA costs, the $9.1 million, of that, the direct costs are related to parking control officers. our hearing officers, as well as a couple of work orders with Department of Emergency Management, SFPD. And so those costs altogether with the overhead rate to the direct charges of our enforcement and hearing officers is $9.1 million.
So which those numbers I saw, in terms of the bigger overall numbers, I guess what's being questioned are more specific line items of different people's salary. What percent of the salary does it make sense? Whether is it a higher percentage than what you usually do for other programs, or is it determined by the size of the program? What percent you take of administrators' salaries? Those type of things we actually didn't see.
The overhead rate is a consistent rate that is used or applied across all recovery programs, and that is calculated through our accounting folks determining upon what is the size of the operating budget related to these support programs. So the 86.7% is a constant percentage that is used amongst all other recovery programs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think it would have been helpful if I had really even broken down more, because it seems like a lot of the questions about some of these issues are not hidden, but certainly it would have been helpful to have specific, really, dollar amounts for each staff members just to see what it looks like. I understand administrative overhead. I understand the administrative fees. But even when I was running my own programs or my own organization, I could tell you within that 15% of whatever administrative fee I take, I could say this goes to that, and that, and that's what I'm not hearing. And thank you very much. I also want to make a comment about what Supervisor Kim mentioned in terms of those that cannot pay, whether or not we could set up a program like Chicago's. Is really intriguing for me, especially if we're talking about setting up a program for those that can't pay, at least for the first time they actually make a mistake like this. I wouldn't support something that where you keep on paying if they get towed 10 times in a year. I'm open, Supervisor Avalos, through the President, to having a continuance of 1 week.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Kim.
Supervisor Peskin made this point for me, but I just want to reiterate, it's not a question about charging our drivers more or charging our Muni riders more. It's not an either or. It's not about our transit first policy either. This is really a question about what is the appropriate and fair way to generate revenue to pay for government services like Muni. Is it progressive taxation? Is it a flat regressive penalty, an exorbitant penalty, which disproportionately impacts our poor and working class families who have to make a decision, again, between paying for rent, paying for food, and getting the car that they need and depend on out of the towaway lot. And I would even surmise that those that have higher incomes are more likely to store their cars in parking lots and parking garages, and therefore may not be as impacted by towaway signs on our streets as well. So if we want to look at making up for the revenue lost, I support that. In fact, 6 members of this board said we want our developers to pay their fair share based on the size of the developments that they build of commercial buildings to help pay for Muni, not working class and poor families with these exorbitant fees on towaway charges. It's not about whether we want to fund Muni adequately or not, and that if we lower the towaway fees, that we're suddenly taking money away from Muni riders. The question is, what is the appropriate source of funding? What is the fair source of funding that pays for government services and services like Muni? And what I am saying is that an exorbitant, flat, regressive penalty like our towaway charge is not the appropriate source of funding, and that we should be looking at other sources of revenue to help make sure that Muni is running efficiently and frequently, and that we are encouraging our transit first policy by making it easier for people to ride on public transit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President. And I completely agree with Supervisor Kim. This is not an either or. We can lower the towing fee. and we can keep Muni service intact. But the way that you keep Muni service intact while you're lowering the towing fee is to find an alternative source of funding, and that's why putting money in from the general fund to backfill the amount that we're taking out makes a lot of sense. And so we can have both, and that is a way to do that. But I think it is important not to take money out of Muni without putting money into Muni to make it whole.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam President. More than wanting to have the last word, I actually just wanted to emphasize that last week we had a discussion about funds for the MTA, for Muni through our transportation sustainability fee. Supervisor Peskin mentioned that in his comments right now. And so we have multiple bites at the apple to find revenue for the department. There was also a discussion about how we could use the TSF to cover operations, but that was something that was being refused by the makers, some of the makers of the legislation that we have before us. So we have lots of sources that we can use, and soaking residents for that doesn't make a lot of sense. And if we are trying to get full cost recovery from people who drive vehicles, who get their vehicles towed, and have impacts on riders, why are we not willing to charge developers a little bit more to get some greater cost recovery for the impacts that development has on our transportation system in San Francisco? We missed that opportunity, but it could be coming back to us again to try and prevent a veto override, and I think it's important to mention that relative to this discussion here today.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Seeing no other names on the roster, on the motion to continue this item 1 week to the meeting of March
15th,
2016, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner.
Aye.
Weiner, aye. There are 11 ayes.
This item will be continued to the meeting of March 15, 2016. Madam Clerk, can we go to the next item, please?
Item 18, resolution to authorize the Department of Public Health to accept and expend an approximate $2.8 million grant for active transportation program funds through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Safe Routes to School grant program for the period of September 1st, 2017 through August 31st, 2019, waiving indirect costs, and to delegate authorization to execute these agreements and any amendments thereto to the Director of Public Health.
Colleagues, can we take this item? Same house, same call. Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 19 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to create a cash revolving fund, allowing the Office of the Clerk of the Board to keep up to $100 in petty cash in the office, and to make other non-substantive changes to other sections of the administrative code that establish cash revolving funds for city departments.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. All right, we are past 2:30, and now it is time to go to our 2:30 commendation, and we have a commendation from Supervisor Katie Tang.
Thank you, President Breed. So today I'd like to call up someone who's been part of our city government for about 3 decades, and I'd like to invite up to the podium Mr. Richard Lee, who has served in our San Francisco Department of Public Health. If we can give him a round of applause, please. So today I wanted to bring Richard here because, unfortunately, he's leaving our city. He is retiring, I believe, at the end of this week. Is that right?
Actually, I'm already retired.
Oh, he's already retired, but made him come back on Tuesday. Sorry about that. But I first met Richard working at Department of Public Health. Obviously, a lot of our work regarding the massage industry and a lot of the legislation we're working on. But through that process, really got to know Richard and some of the work that he's done through Department of Public Health. So wanted to take this time to honor him for his incredible service to our city. So Richard, he has served as the acting director of environmental health. And he also started working with the city in April of 1987 as a senior industrial hygienist, where he initiated new programs in the Bureau of Toxics and Safety Services, such as the DPH Emergency Responder Program with San Francisco Fire Department's Hazardous Material Program. 2 decades later, he was promoted to the Director of Environmental Health Regulatory Programs, and there he managed all the permitting programs in the environmental health branch, including massage, food, water quality, and healthy housing. In June of 2013, Richard became the acting director of environmental health, where he helped incorporate the environmental health branch into the new population health division. Some of his colleagues, or former or current, describe him as honest and dedicated in his leadership, and he helped move our environmental health division into the 21st century. So I understand that Richard, after he is fully in retirement, plans on starting a walking group and plans to start biking more, hopefully spend more time with his family. And I just wanted to say that, you know, it's so rare when we get to see people who have served our city for so many decades, so dedicated and diligently. So we really wanted to honor you at this time and wish you all the best in your retirement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first, I want to say thank you for this incredible honor. I know a lot of city workers don't have this ability to be able to get this honor, so thank you from the board for this, and thank you, Supervisor Tang, for all the work that you've done with us. And actually, a lot of supervisors, we've worked together on a number of ordinances and resolutions together. I just want to say it's been an honor working for the city and for the health department, and that I hope that we've improved environmental health in San Francisco during the last 30 years that I was working here. I want to thank a lot of my prior staff who are here today supporting me. They're a great group, and I'm just going to encourage you to work with them closely too. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also just received a request for commendation from Supervisor Marr.
Thank you. Colleagues, I wanted to invite up Stephanie Anderson from the Great Race for Clean Air to come forward. And we have a number of businesses and community-based organizations that we're going to acknowledge today. I'm the chair of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and I sit on the body with Supervisor Avalos and a representative from Mayor Lee's office as well. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District every year recognizes winners in what we call the Great Race for Clean Air. It's an amazing 2-month competition between Bay Area employers and community organizations to reduce air pollution by encouraging employees to use commute alternatives such as public transit, carpooling, vanpooling, bicycling, and walking. Anything but driving alone to work. And during October and September, well over 500 employees from about 50 different companies logged in their daily air-friendly commutes and reduced approximately, I think it's 326,000 pounds of CO2, carbon dioxide from the air in that only 2-month period. And we choose Bay Area winners in 3 categories. The highest, one is the highest CO2 savings. Number 2 is the highest percentage of, quote, clean commute days logged. And number 3 is the highest percentage of employees participating in the race. And I wanted to acknowledge the winners from San Francisco. So there's winners from all over the 9-county Bay Area. For the highest overall CO2 savings in first place, and a longtime winner in, I think, every single great race for clean air. It's Nectar Therapeutics, and representing them for the trophy is Brenda Chu. And I'll just be asking people to come forward. For the highest level of employee participation, the award's given to 5 different size categories, from big to small businesses. And here in San Francisco, there's 6 different winners in the tiny, tiny mini category, but they're a big force in our communities, especially with Vision Zero Coalition. It's Walk SF that took first place, and accepting the award is Kathy DeLuca. In the small category, companies with 26 to 100 employees. In second place, we have Peanut Labs and Research Now, and accepting the trophy is Aaron Davidson from Peanut Labs. And the first place winner in small category is HDR Inc., and accepting the trophy is Michael Orr. In the middle-sized company category, companies with 100 to 500 employees, all 3 winners are from San Francisco. Number 3, the JCC, the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco, and accepting for them is Suzanne Soffer. In second place, Taulia, and accepting the trophy is Angela Galdos. And the first place winner is Nectar Therapeutics. Once again, Brenda Chu accepting the trophy. Congratulations to all these winners. The Great Race for Clean Air, sponsored by our Air District, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, in partnership with San Francisco Department of the Environment, 511 Rideshare, 511 Contra Costa, Commute.org, and the Solano Napa commuter information. A complete list of all the winners is available at sparetheair.org. And I'd like to ask if Ms. Anderson from the Great Race would like to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for recognizing these employers who put in so much effort to encourage their employees to use alternatives to driving alone to work. And I think the big message here is that a lot of smaller businesses can really have a very big impact on our local air quality by encouraging people to carpool, take transit, ride bikes, or use other modes to get to work. And even if you can't shift your mode every single day, changing your mode of commute even 1 or 2 days a week can make a very big impact. So we just want to acknowledge everyone who's worked so hard to make this change, and thank you so much for this recognition.
Thank you to Stephanie. Let's have a hand for all the winners. And Supervisor Avalos, want to join me?
Thank you for your hard work and congratulations. Okay, that was the last of our 2:30 commendations, colleagues. We will return to our regular agenda, beginning with item number 20.
Item 20 is a resolution to receive and approve an annual report for the Top of Broadway Community Benefit District for fiscal year 2014 through 15.
Roll call vote.
On item 20, Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang. Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 21, please.
Item 21 is an ordinance to amend the planning code to allow an existing bar on the ground floor in the Upper Market Street Neighborhood Commercial Transit District to expand to the second floor under specified circumstances with a conditional use authorization, and to affirm the Planning Department CEQA determination and make the other findings.
Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the ordinance passes unanimously on the first reading. Next item, please.
Item 22 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to delete the requirement that applicants for membership on boards and commissions disclose all felony convictions, to limit the city from using criminal history information in making decisions about appointment and removal of members of certain boards, commissions, and other bodies, and to require the city to follow certain restrictions when inquiring about or using conviction history information to make decisions about appointment or removal.
Seeing no names on the roster, colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Item 23, please.
Item 23 is a resolution to authorize adoption of the Mental Health Services Act annual report for fiscal year 2015 through 16.
Same house, same call. Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item.
Item 24, ordinance to amend the administrative code to update the definition of final compensation for purposes of retirement benefits under the San Francisco Employees Retirement System and to include in that definition compensation earnable under the Judges Retirement System and Judges Retirement System 2.
Same house, same call.
Oh, could we do a roll call?
Supervisor Peskin.
Roll call, please.
Roll call vote, please.
On item 24, Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin?
No.
Peskin, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. There are 10 ayes, 1 no, with Supervisor Peskin in the dissent.
The ordinance is passed on the first reading. Item 25, please.
Item 25 is a motion to appoint William Barnacle, Kimberly Flaherty, and Michael Maffey to the Veterans Affairs Commission, term ending January 31st, 2020.
Roll call vote.
On item 25, Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The motion is approved unanimously. Item 26.
Item 26, motion to appoint Angela Coleman to the Reentry Council, term ending June 1st, 2016.
Colleagues, can we take this item? Same house, same call. Without objection, the motion is approved unanimously. Can we go to our committee reports?
Item 27 was considered by the Land Use and Transportation Committee at a regular meeting on Monday, March 7th, and was recommended as amended with a new title. It's a resolution to declare the intention of the Board of Supervisors to order the vacation of James Alley and Jackson Street as part of improvements to the Chinese Hospital, and to set the Committee of the Whole hearing date for April 5th, 2016 at 3 p.m. here in the Legislative Chamber, Room 200, for all persons interested in the proposed vacation of the said public right-of-way. And, Madam President, that's room 250.
Okay, colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Let's go to roll call for introductions.
Supervisor Yee, you are first to introduce new business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clerk. I have a few things. Today I'm going to be introducing a call for a hearing of the Office of Early Education and Office of ECE. I want to hear their draft plan, or their plan that will be approved as a citywide plan to basically roll out the budget for the upcoming years. And so this is, as you know, an important issue for me to see how well we are serving our youngest children in the city. And hopefully this plan does exactly that. I also want to mention that because I brought up this other issue and I asked for a hearing, and even though I asked for it already and it's going to come up on Thursday, it's been like almost 4 months since I asked for it. So I just want to re-mention that I'm going to have this hearing on Thursday regarding the issue of chronic absenteeism, which is really an important issue, not only to me, but all the families that get impacted. And we need to deal with that because there's a pattern of those young children that are absent a lot from school will continue to be absent and eventually drop out of school. The other thing that I wanted to do is introduce a resolution, and this is not a new type of request, but introduce a resolution on a hidden but growing problem in our community, that is problem gambling. Last year, the Board of Supervisors unanimously declared March as Problem Gambling Awareness Month. I'm bringing this to our attention again as the issue continues to grow in our communities. Gambling is becoming more accessible with online games. So it's not just sitting around a card table, but there's a lot of places where you could have access now. And this includes daily fantasy sports and internet casinos. And as you can imagine, we have one of the nation's most popular gambling occasions just around the corner with the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament. I'm sure there's several people in this room that are guilty of playing that, but we have to understand that not everybody could control their urge to keep on putting a lot of money into this, and they essentially lose a lot of money. While these games can be fun and enticing, there is a dark side. Every year, 6 to 8 million of Americans, including more than 1.2 million Californians, meet the criteria for problem gambling. They, in turn, negatively impact the lives of another 48 to 80 million individuals, a lot of it family members. And I could attest to this because I've had family members with gambling problems, and they had no help. And I know of at least one of my family members where their family got ruined because of how much the individual spent on gambling. So this is real stuff that happens to the best of us in terms of our relationships. Since the addiction is so well hidden, many individuals do not even realize they have the problem, and only 15% of them actually seek treatment. The problem gambling is a disorder. Has similarities to that of alcohol and drug dependence. That's why when you look at what's happening now, there's many of our social services, for instance, they actually package everything together because it's all related. A lot of times when they're gambling, they also have drug addictions or alcohol addiction. Anyone can have a gambling problem. The addiction does not discriminate across social economic groups, age, or race. It affects so many communities that it is considered a public health issue. However, groups at high risk of gambling addiction are our most vulnerable population, which is are the youth, the seniors, and ethnic minorities, including Asian communities. I remember some of these because of what I mentioned before. Even my mother was a very heavy gambler. Maybe that's why I don't like gambling, because of what she did. This is why it's crucial to shed light on the problem gambling so that families and individuals suffering can seek the help they need. In San Francisco, the Department of Public Health, in partnership with NICO's Chinese Health Coalition, has one of the nation's first problem gambling prevention programs that is being modeled by others across the country. They provide free resources, counseling, support, and outreach to at-risk communities in different languages. There is also a locally based 24/7 helpline, and that number is 1-888-968-7888. That's available to people. So I hope that we can reach out to more people who need these resources and keep an eye out for a loved one to prevent this addiction from beginning in the first place. So I also want to thank Supervisor Eric Marr for co-sponsoring this resolution and of course, his support for this issue over the years. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, today I'm submitting a piece of legislation titled Prohibiting Leasing for the Extraction of Fossil Fuels on Public Land owned by San Francisco. I want to thank my co-sponsors for jumping on with this legislation, President Breed, Supervisors Campos, Cohen, Marr, Peskin, and Wiener. Thank you very much. Who would have thought that San Francisco has public land that is leased to Chevron to drill and extract oil? It's in Kern County, and actually Kern County, the Kern River oil field sites have been known as a site where contaminated water is leaking into the water supply of that county. Could this field be part of that? We're not quite clear yet, but we're looking into that. But overall, does it make sense that we have property owned by the city where oil extraction is going on? It's a scientific fact that collectively the fossil fuel corporations' known reserves around the world, if we were to burn all the known reserves, we would release so much CO2 that we would make the planet uninhabitable. Mother Earth would not be able to sustain life. In order to actually keep temperatures low, and the goal that scientists and the UN has put forward is to keep the Earth's temperature increase since the start of the Industrial Revolution only 2 degrees Celsius, we would need to keep 2/3 of the known reserves of fossil fuel corporations in the ground. And at the same time, while we're trying to prevent the burning of this fuel, fossil fuel corporations are trying to increase their drilling, increase the known reserves, do more exploration. Well, San Francisco, we can do our part. We can make sure that we keep oil from being burned, and we can make sure that our public land where oil currently is being extracted cannot be used for that extraction purpose ever again. The current lease with Chevron expires in the year 2020, and this legislation would terminate that relationship with the Chevron Corporation, where we would not see our public land used for drilling. And that would actually help with align our purposes of reducing our carbon footprint and reducing toxins into the environment that we're trying to do as a city to protect residents, not just here, but in California and around the world. Because CO2 is a global issue. So this legislation also mirrors legislation that Congressman Jared Huffman from San Rafael introduced late last year called the Keep It in the Ground Act. And that act would ban new leases on federal land for oil, fossil fuel extraction. So I think it's really be a great step forward that we can all join in our effort for preventing climate change or limiting the impacts of climate change. And this legislation is part of that. The rest I'll submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. President Breed.
Thank you, colleagues. Today I have 2 items. I'm introducing a resolution supporting Assembly Bill 1825, written by Assemblymember Rich Gordon and co-authored by nearly 24 state legislators. This one is for the dogs. Currently, when a dog is seized from an animal fighting ring, California law automatically labels it a vicious dog, regardless of whether it's a puppy, a stolen pet, or a breeding mother. The victim, in other words, is presumed to be dangerous, to be the aggressor. That's a standard we would never accept for humans, and we shouldn't accept it for our animal friends either. The vicious label condemns dogs to a life of strict confinement, which almost always results in these canine victims being euthanized, whether they were actually vicious or not. Many of the dogs seized in connection with animal fighting would thrive in a loving, supportive environment and do not pose any other threat to dogs or humans. And we know this because it has been proven time and time again in other states. The vast majority of states give canine victims of cruelty a chance for adoption by offering them the same individual health and behavioral assessments as other dogs brought into a shelter. And many of these dogs do go on to live healthy, happy lives. Some even become therapy or service dogs, but not in California. An outdated and frankly cruel provision in the law arbitrarily condemns these dogs and puppies for no reason other than they were the victims of human criminals. AB 1825 will change that. It will allow animal shelters to individually evaluate dogs from animal fight rings just as they would other dogs and make a fair, informed assessment about the dog's temperament, adoption, or placement with a rescue organization. Trained shelter personnel are the ones who should be making these decisions. They do it every day with every other incoming dog using best practice techniques developed over the years by animal shelter professionals. Turn off your mic, Supervisor Yee, please. I want to thank the San Francisco Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the American SPCA, the Humane Society of the United States, the Best Friends Animal Society, and the California Animal Control Directors Association for their support. Together, we can give these canine victims a chance to live happy lives, with humane euthanasia being the last result instead of a foregone conclusion. We can give these dogs a second chance. Colleagues, I ask you to join me in supporting Assembly Bill 1825 and urging the state legislature and governor to pass it. The second item I have is an in memoriam. It's very personal to me. Over the weekend on March 6th, I lost a dear friend to leukemia, Chris Carpenter. He was only 46. Every year, 12,000 patients are diagnosed with life-threatening blood cancer like leukemia, and they rely on a bone marrow or umbilical cord blood transfusion to survive. Chris could not find a donor match, and although he tried a new innovative treatment, it did not work for him. The only successful treatment for this type of disease is through a bone marrow or umbilical cord blood transplant. According to the Asian American Donor Program, 70% of patients diagnosed with blood cancer cannot find a matching donor within their family. That means they must depend on strangers. But because makers used to identify matches are inherited, patients are more likely to match with someone from their own race or ethnicity. That is the issue at hand today. According to the National Marrow Donor Program, only 30% of all registered donors are of minority descent. 16% of Asian or Pacific Islander patients cannot find a donor. The ratio increases to 17% for Hispanic or Latino patients and 24% for African Americans. These numbers may not seem very high, but every life is precious and every patient deserves all the help and resources that can be made available to them. Part of the problem for the lack of marrow donors is a common misconception that donating bone marrow hurts. Maybe you've seen scenes in medical TV shows where a doctor inserts a big needle into a patient's spine. In fact, donors are given anesthesia during this outpatient procedure, so there's no pain, and the bone marrow is extracted from the back of the pelvic bone. When the anesthesia wears off, donors may experience pain similar to feeling a bruise after falling on ice or slipping. The whole procedure takes just half a day, and the discomfort for a day or two is incomparable to saving someone's life. I'm currently working with the Asian American Donor Program to organize a donor drive right here in City Hall. Registering as a donor takes only a few minutes, and we especially need donors from the following ethnicities: African Americans, American Indian and Alaskan Native, Asian, including East, Southeast, and South Asia's, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, Hispanic and Latino, and other multiracial individuals. I will announce the details of the event once they are finalized. I hope everyone would come and sign up to be a donor. Chris leaves behind a twin brother, his name Carl, a good friend of mine as well, his wife Danielle, their children and their grandchildren. He will be missed by his family and a community who loved him. Thank you, and the rest I submit.
Thank you, Madam President. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I'd like to begin by thanking my colleagues who are co-sponsoring an ordinance that I'm introducing today, declaring a state of emergency on homelessness here in San Francisco. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisor Kim, Supervisor Avalos, Supervisor Marr, Supervisor Yee, and President Breed. And I look forward to engaging with other supervisors as we discuss this very important initiative. I'd like to begin by apologizing to the people of the City and County of San Francisco. As an elected official, but I say this also as a person who lives in San Francisco and who loves the city, I believe that collectively city government has failed the people of San Francisco when it comes to adequately addressing the issue of homelessness. I believe we have failed. I don't believe that the agencies that are responsible for responding to those issues, to the issue of homelessness, have done the job that is needed. The fact is that for years, people without homes have been pushed into neighborhoods throughout the city and county of San Francisco, whether it's the Mission, Bernal Heights in my district, or South Market in Supervisor Kim's district. This issue has been going on for years, and there hasn't really been a real substantive plan that actually provides services and housing for all the people who need them. This failure has caused a public health emergency that recently, with respect to encampments on Division Street, led to the removal of those encampments. As a supervisor, it's not like I woke up today and said, you know, we have an emergency. We, as members of this board, have been working on this issue for many years. And throughout this time, I have always tried to be a part of not just the criticism, but the solution. When I talked to the mayor more than a year ago and talked about the possibility of partnering with him and his administration to open up the first navigation center, I did that with the hope that we could come up with something that worked. And what's incredible about the navigation center as a concept is that the concept has actually proven to work. It is not a silver bullet, but it has demonstrated that if you place people in the right setting and connect housing to it, that it is possible to actually move people into permanent housing. That has happened in less than a year at this navigation center. And yet, a year after this center was open, it still remains the one navigation center that the city has. We should have opened many more navigation centers a long time ago. Over the last few months, I have received hundreds of calls, emails from people throughout my district and throughout other parts of the city. And I have to say that I no longer know what I can say. I don't know what I say to the mother who complains about taking their child to school, having to step over the human feces that's on the sidewalk, or to the resident of Bernal Heights who complains about some psychotic episode that the person living in front of their house is having, or the fact that the person just went to the bathroom in their driveway. The people of San Francisco are rightly upset. They're angry. They're angry that people who have lost jobs, people who have been evicted, people dealing with drug addiction, people dealing with mental health issues, that they're living on the streets of San Francisco. 7,000 of them. And what we have seen by way of response from this administration, respectfully to the mayor, and he's a good person, it's not working. Removing people from Division Street, if you take that example, which has impacted my district, Supervisor Kim's district, Supervisor Cohen's district, removing people without giving every one of them a place to go has not actually solved the problem. It simply has moved people to smaller streets. And sure enough, if you walk around Division Street, you will see that tents have sprung up in other smaller streets. And when the executive branch talks about this issue, and I appreciate the goodwill, there's a lot of conversation and a lot of talk about how they are working on something. Last week, Supervisor Farrell held a hearing on navigation centers, which I was proud to co-sponsor, during which the head of the Mayor's Office of Hope, a good person who has a lot of skills, unfortunately said that it would take as much as 6 months to open yet another navigation center. And so long as it is the case that we only have one navigation center with 75 spaces, it will continue to be a problem that we don't have places for people to go. And I will talk today, and I will end it with this. As I was going to the navigation center today, I saw a woman an older African American woman who was sitting right in front of the entrance of the Navigation Center. Her name is Rosalind. And she was there because over the weekend, her best friend, and they were homeless together, sleeping next to each other, her best friend had died on the streets of San Francisco. And she was camping out in front of the Navigation Center because she did not want to be next. She was pleading with me, David, can you get me into this center? And it breaks your heart that all I can say is I will try. We have to do better. We have an obligation to do better, not only for Rosalind, but for all the people in San Francisco, because this has reached a point where it is a crisis. And with all due respect to the mayor, I appreciate that a lot of hard work has gone into this, but we have to do better. What we are doing is simply not enough. What I am asking for today in this introduction is that I'm asking that this Board of Supervisors move as quickly as possible to activate a provision in state law, and I want to thank President Breed for waiving the 30-day rule on this item. Activate a provision in state law that is usually reserved for natural disasters like floods and earthquakes. And this is not a natural disaster. It's a man-made disaster, but it is a disaster nevertheless. This will allow the city to take emergency action to build additional navigation centers on city property. The declaration of a shelter emergency expedites the red tape that could be an obstacle to opening these centers. And in the next few weeks, following the introduction of this declaration of emergency, I will be introducing legislation as soon as possible that requires the executive branch of this city to build an additional 6 navigation centers in the next year. 3 of those centers must be built within the next 4 months. Some people have asked me, is that doable? Is that possible? Is 6 the right number? Should it be 5? Should it be 4? I'm open to a discussion. But I do believe that we as city government have to set a target for how many and for when they will be open. The ordinance will also require a funding plan that will activate emergency reserve funds and streamline and cut current spending in our $9 billion budget to pay for the centers that are needed. And I want to say this, it is important that we have an open and transparent process. And to my colleagues, what this ordinance envisions is that there will be a process, there will be a plan outlined, and that plan will be presented to the Board of Supervisors so that we can review for ourselves what is presented by the administration. And the idea is that within a matter of 1 year, we will see centers that we know have worked in the mission work in other parts of the city. I would say this, if we can afford $5 million for the Super Bowl, we can afford money to address this crisis of homelessness. We, again, I reiterate, cannot wait any longer. I want to thank the residents of my district who have written to me, who have called my office. I want you to know that I have heard you and that I will do everything within my power within the next 9 months, which is how long I have left in office, to make sure that we in city government are doing everything we can. As members of this Board of Supervisors, we don't have the authority under the charter to dictate to departments what they should do, but we do have the authority and the ability to lay out a strategy and to hold them accountable, hold this administration accountable for complying with that strategy. That is the point. I ask you to join me in this effort. I want to thank my amazing, amazing staff, Carolyn Goosen, Hillary Ronan, Sheila Chung-Hagan, who have been working on this. I also want to thank our city attorney's office. This is very complicated stuff, and we want to thank them for the expeditious handling of our requests. I look forward to a conversation. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you. Submit.
Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, I have one hearing request. I know there were differences that were highlighted a number of weeks ago on this board about Super Bowl 50 and the funds dedicated to continue to provide the vital public services like public safety and transportation during these week-long events. As budget chair, I do take the expenditures of our city very seriously and seek to obviously make the best use of our resources. During the lead up to the Super Bowl, there were discussions and questions around if the roughly $5 million is absorbed in city costs was worth the investment of hosting Super Bowl 50 and the related events. Even though a number of economic experts predicted we'd end up in the black, I always talked at the time that we need to wait until the ink was dry after Super Bowl 50 to evaluate what had happened, not only as a city, but from a cost perspective. Now that Super Bowl 50 is over, we know that it was one of the most attended and viewed Super Bowls in history, the most philanthropic, and that an estimated 1.1 million people visited San Francisco for the related events leading up to the game. We also have seen early signs that Super Bowl 50 was an economic boon for our city, with promising revenues from our city's hotel taxes during the week, and similarly from concession revenues and passenger, private, and corporate air traffic at SFO. According to recent reports, the city's hotel taxes brought in roughly $5 million more than during the same period last year. And I know that not every hotel visitor during that time was here for the Super Bowl, but the number is significant. And SFO just itself experienced an over 16% increase in commercial passenger traffic compared to the previous year. The concession tenants at SFO realized close to $4.5 million more in additional revenue as a result of the Super Bowl, with some retailers reporting sales increases of over 500%. There are still more economic numbers to come out, including sales taxes during the week and other revenues, and I look forward to reviewing those numbers as well. Given there are a number of pending proposals and a supplemental appropriation related to the impact of Super Bowl 50, I want to ensure that we have an honest and transparent discussion about the costs and benefits of hosting that big game. In the coming weeks, our Comptroller's Office will be issuing an economic report on Super Bowl 50 that will for the first time state the economic impact, both in terms of revenues and expenses calculated for hosting Super Bowl 50. So today I'm introducing a hearing request on the economic impact of Super Bowl 50 and asking the Comptroller's Office to present on their report when it's released in the coming weeks. Again, with all of the pending proposals and dialogue around Super Bowl 50 and its impacts, I thought it was necessary for us and believe it's necessary for us and the public to have an honest and transparent discussion about the costs and benefits, and look forward to seeing that in the weeks to come. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I have a series of legislation that I am introducing today along the lines following in Supervisor David Campos's footsteps on the homelessness crisis as well. As Supervisor Campos has already mentioned, the homelessness crisis that we are seeing today is not the result of a singular policy decision. It is the result of decades of misguided and mean-spirited policy decisions from the 1980s, including a divestment in affordable housing by both the federal government and the state, decisions to close mental health hospitals with insufficient investment in community-based facilities for those dealing with mental health challenges, and wages that have not kept up with the increasing cost of living and housing in many of our urban cities. 600,000 Americans don't have a home to sleep in on any given night. Today, 600,000 Americans don't have a place that they can call home and know that they have a bed to sleep in. 100,000 of them are chronically homeless. Over 40 years ago, this country had a surplus of affordable housing. In fact, 300,000 units above and beyond what the waiting list needed in terms of housing our indigent or low-income households. Beginning with the Reagan administration, who began to slash housing and HUD funding, we have since 1976 to 2002 seen a 50% reduction in housing subsidies and funding over the last 30 years. When you add that with the gentrification that we are seeing in cities across the country today, the loss of single-room occupancy hotel, the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, the deinstitutionalization of our mentally ill, and cutbacks to our social safety network that we saw under the Clinton administration, we see the mass homelessness phenomenon that exists in cities across the U.S. and the state of California today. In fact, 1 out of every 4 eligible households for federal rental assistance actually are able to get that rental assistance simply because the cost of housing is too much. We have a growing homeless population here in San Francisco, similar to what we are seeing in the city of Los Angeles and Sacramento. Change is needed, and while we certainly need to make sure that every dollar we spend here in San Francisco is accounted for and spent wisely, and I support Supervisors Campos to open 6 navigation centers over this year, we also need the state to step up and help, because this is a statewide problem and challenge that no single city, even one as generous and compassionate as San Francisco, can solve alone. In fact, this is a regional and statewide issue. We cannot solve homelessness when counties like Marin don't have a 365-day shelter system. We wouldn't ask or expect Southern California to deal with the aftermath of a major earthquake in their region alone. We wouldn't ask the Sierra Foothills to address a devastating fire alone. And we wouldn't ask Sacramento to respond to a major flood without help. And we shouldn't let any single district or city solve the homeless crisis that we're seeing in our city today by themselves. So today I'm announcing a legislative package that I will not claim is a silver bullet solution, but it is a group of policies that we have to pursue because we know that this crisis is not insurmountable. We have solutions, and they start with really investing in housing first by freeing up and coordinating statewide resources and responses to the need of our fellow citizens who need our help desperately. In fact, what I think is the moral imperative of cities across the country and the state of California is that our fastest growing demographic in our homeless count are working class families. They're families with a working parent and children that cannot afford to live in the city where they are employed. We also have to have a single customer-centered database that allows us to count for our spending and to be able to gauge which programs are effective at permanently ending homelessness and which should be scaled to need. So I'm also calling for a hearing on a system that we can make sure that we are maximizing our resources, similar to what the city of New York has called for in the last month by Mayor de Blasio. And finally, by putting into place a citywide pit stop public toilet program that we already know works, the one that we started here right in the Tenderloin. Because the reality is that we don't have enough shelter beds right now for the over 7,000 homeless men, women, and children who are struggling to survive on our streets by sleeping in tents, in cars, in our shelters, or couch surfing. And I want to thank and acknowledge Supervisor Cohen, who has been working very closely on declaring a state of emergency at the statewide level, Supervisor Campos, who is working to declare a local state of emergency, and Supervisor and President London Breed, who is working very closely with our office to make sure that we have a citywide pit stop program. To mention a couple of statistics, California accounts for 21% of the nation's homeless population in 2015. 21% of the 600,000 Americans that need a bed that they can call home on any given night. California also had the highest percentage of homeless people counted in unsheltered locations in the United States. We also have the largest number of homeless unaccompanied youth at 28% of the national total. We also have the largest number of veterans experiencing homelessness, with more than 11,000 veterans living in the streets of California in 2015. Almost a third of San Francisco's homeless population initially became homeless outside of San Francisco, as self-reported in our recent survey. The state of Hawaii has declared a state of emergency and has used the proclamation as a way to make additional funds available and to extend contracts with homeless service provider, earmarking funds for new family shelters, and bypassing existing ordinance to enable swift action to stand up needed shelters as soon as possible. And the city of Los Angeles has declared a citywide state of emergency. And now San Francisco, through Supervisor Campos' resolution, is doing the same. But we can also do more to have a coordinated statewide response with certain concrete actions. 1, inventory all surplus public property throughout the states. 2, make these available for stand-up shelters that are designated for specific communities of need and interest, whether they are families, LGBTQ, seniors, those are medically frail, and young people. Finally, immediate investment in more affordable housing resources, something the state has also cut, so that municipalities can put shovels in the ground and build affordable housing projects into the pipeline and refinance with much lower land costs if public property can be used instead of private property. The Senate President Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon has introduced the No Place Like Home initiative policy framework, and its goal is to put a $2 billion bond to construct permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless with mental health illness, $200 million over 4 years to build supportive housing in shorter-term rent subsidies while the permanent housing is being constructed, and support for 2 special housing programs that will assist families. This and a statewide state of emergency is an important way that we as the state of California can do more to address homelessness in all of our communities. And finally, as I mentioned, I'm also introducing a supplemental appropriation to get 6 more pit stops throughout the city in the ground before our fiscal year of 26-2017. We know that the pit stops, the 6 that we have instituted in the district that I represent, has had a huge impact in our community, seeing reductions in steam cleaning requests as much as 60% in these neighborhoods, because we finally have provided an option for people who don't have one to use toilets with dignity and respect. Also providing our residents who may not be using the toilets an opportunity to walk through clean and healthier streets. In 2015, in November, we called for the hearing to expand the pit stop citywide to include staffing JC2Co bathrooms, as well as adding pit stop mobile toilets to the Mission, South of Market, Western Addition, and the Haight. I do want to recognize and thank Department of Public Works for their creative thinking and their support throughout the pilot and expansion. We're also really happy to see that our mobile pit stops are expanding their hours and days to 12 hours a day and 7 days a week. We want to make sure that we are basing the locations on an objective criteria, such as 311 calls, near kitchens, away from residences and business entries, and also make sure that we are addressing multiple needs, including syringe disposal boxes, dog waste bag distribution, and other sorts of things that the pit stop has been incredibly successful in accommodating. On average, already, almost 100 people use the original 3 pit stops in the Tenderloin every single day. These 3 pit stops in our district that we piloted with the incredible support and leadership of Public Works have been used over 4,500 times. And we have saved over 2,400 gallons of water per month because of the reduction in steam cleaning requests in these neighborhoods. These facilities have made our streets cleaner, with over 120 bags of garbage collected at these 3 sites, dog poop bags, again, made available to the public, and secure needle drop boxes to aid in collection and proper disposal of these used syringe needles. This is not a problem or a need that is unique to the homeless population in San Francisco. In fact, cities across the country are taking note of the work that we are doing and asking how they can start pit stops in their cities as well. And we look forward to seeing this expansion beyond the South of Market, Tenderloin, and now the Mission to other parts of the city as well. So again, want to acknowledge my colleagues for their support in addressing together the issue of our residents and neighbors who live on our streets, and the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Marr.
Thank you. I wanted to acknowledge Supervisor Kim for the editorial on homelessness and really raising the issue on the emergency through the state level. And thanks so much to Supervisor Campos for the introduction and the mayor starting the meeting off with some comments. And instead of pointing fingers, I think we should all be doing our best to work together on solutions. And as Supervisor Kim mentioned, it's not a silver bullet. But even the mayor's comments about the navigation centers, from my memory, as Mayor Art Agnos from the late 80s developed with Paul Bowden and Bob Prentice, the homeless coordinator of that time, a multi-service center approach that really looked at a humane and compassionate approach to homeless people, with homeless people involved in that development of a policy, that the creation of navigation center type centers was really critical, as well as substance abuse, detox, and health services with pathways to permanent housing, even at that time. And in my opinion, the 6 centers that Supervisor Campos is proposing to me is similar to the proposal like Mayor Agnos back in those days. And Supervisor Avalos and his staff and I visited the Pier 80 temporary 180-bed shelter with Sam Dodge, who I really support and respect. And I've also rode along with HOT teams to the Richmond district. Homelessness isn't just in the city's core. It stretches all the way out to near the Cliff House below where Playland at the beach used to be, as people are congregating in key parts even of my district. And in a district approach, we're working with nonprofits and churches and Sam Dodge and his staff to really try to figure out how do we find more of a geographical spread of different centers so that the homeless that are in the city's core, but also out in as far out as Supervisor Avalos or Cohen's districts, or far west as my district, have access to a place where they're not going to have all of their belongings confiscated, and they'll have some sense of services and a safe and clean place to go. But I really hope that with my colleagues and their approaches that we're not pointing fingers and saying people are seeking headlines, and really working together on these issues. Also, I wanted to thank Supervisor Yee for acknowledging the problem gambling issues in the Asian and Pacific Islander communities, and thanks especially to Kent Wu, who's been championing the issue for many decades with the Nikos Chinese Health Coalition as well. And colleagues, today I'm introducing a resolution that addresses a major public health danger that's creeping into our city and many other cities around this country. It involves fast food, big box, and chain establishments applying for alcohol permits for on-site sales. Examples are Taco Bell and Starbucks. And I want to thank especially Lieutenant Dave Falzone from our San Francisco Police Department and his alcohol licensing unit for bringing this issue to the attention of our Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee over a period of time. Our office has been looking at this issue since last year, and I wanted to say that with the strong youth-led grassroots San Francisco Prevention Coalition that involves the Youth Leadership Institute, UCSF, San Francisco Department of Public Health, and many others who are organizing for healthier and more equitable approaches to dealing with these issues. In last September, we held a hearing in Public Safety Committee to address this growing community concern of oversaturation of alcohol outlets and businesses authorized to sell alcohol, especially in low-income communities where the saturation is even higher. There are currently about 4,500 different businesses that sell alcohol throughout San Francisco, but the floodgates could be opened with Taco Bell and Starbucks and other big stores starting to seek these licenses. We've heard from the Grassroots Prevention Coalition the concerns, especially from young people, of the growing number of chains seeking these ways of gaining revenue at the expense of the health of our communities. It has tremendous public health impacts that can be quantified of how much it costs our city, according to our Department of Public Health. According to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, an average of 500 underage youth die annually from alcohol-related causes in California alone. And in last December, at our board hearing, I and many from the community expressed our concerns that as this new retail shift in big box and large chain business models that currently allow or are gearing up for Starbucks and Taco Bell and other entities to seek these kinds of alcohol permits. I also just wanted to say that this resolution raises the concerns that the alcohol beverage or concerns, and it urges the California Department of Alcohol Beverage Control to deny alcohol license applications of fast food and cafe retail chain businesses in San Francisco, and I urge your consideration and support. The rest I'll submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, on the happy side, I will be placing on the imperative agenda at the end of the board meeting a resolution declaring this Saturday as Russell Gamina Day in the city and county of San Francisco. Russ recently retired after 65 years at the Salesian Boys and Girls Club. He is beloved not only in North Beach but throughout the city and county of San Francisco. He spearheaded a $10.5 million renovation and expansion of the Boys and Girls Club, which recently opened. There is much, much more to say about Mr. Gamina, but I would like to, later on in the meeting, declare March 12th to be Russ Gamina Day in the city and county of San Francisco. And on a sad note, I would like to adjourn today's meeting in the memory of my friend Ann Hunt, who worked as a food server at the Fairmont Hotel for 28 years until she retired. She, after experiencing some intimidation as a worker, became a proud Local 2 union shop steward and stood up for her coworkers. She also served countless hours on the negotiating committee for 3 citywide contracts, and while locked out by the hotel, she walked the picket lines night and day, making up songs to keep spirits high. I remember her in that lockout. She was arrested 5 times in labor demonstrations fighting for health care, and she loved music. After her shift at the Fairmont, she could sometimes see the great artists who performed in the Venetian Room, including her favorite, Ella Fitzgerald, and then might serve them breakfast or lunch the next day. In 1982, she met her husband, a lovely man named John, who was playing with a band at Ginsberg's Irish Pub, if those of you remember that, on Bay Street. After a whirlwind courtship of 3 years, they were married on Christmas Eve, 1986, to which the kids said, "It's about time." After hearing Anne sing around the house, John encouraged and cajoled her to sing at the Gold Dust Lounge, and from then on she took great pleasure in being able to participate in the music she loved so much and greatly appreciated the many great musicians who generously shared with their world with her. My condolences to her husband, John, to her twin sister, to her daughter and son-in-law, and son and daughter-in-law. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, today I am introducing legislation to reform our public contracting process, specifically to allow public agencies in San Francisco to rely on the past performance of contractors as a factor in awarding contracts. In San Francisco, currently, we have basically a pure low bid system. The lowest bidder receives the contract, regardless of whether that contractor has done a good job in the past, regardless of whether the contractor has ended up costing the city even more than other bidders because of excessive change orders, understaffed jobs, delays, or poor workmanship. We know that the most of our city contractors do a terrific job and deliver good and timely work product to our city, but unfortunately there are some contractors who do not. We are in a period of unprecedented infrastructure investment in San Francisco, replacing our entire library system, renovating basically every park, rec center, pool, playground, accelerating our road resurfacing, modernizing our sewer and water systems, our public health system, and so on and so forth. As we invest our precious public dollars in this important infrastructure work, we need to make sure that the taxpayer is getting the best bang for his or her buck. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we are awarding contracts based on the overall best value, not just the low bid. Of course, the bid price is an important factor in determining how to award a contract, but city departments should have the ability to look at a contractor's past performance, to look at their ability to actually deliver a job on time and on budget, to look at whether they engage in unreasonable practices around change orders, to look at whether they have a track record of systematically understaffing their jobs so that they end up taking way too much time and costing more for the taxpayer. This best value system is, I believe we're at the beginning of a trend. The UC system has moved to a best value system. Los Angeles is moving toward a best value system, and San Francisco should as well. This legislation requires that departments take a look at how to do this, and we also understand that every department is different, and what the departments will need to do is to create the factors that will be evaluated and to make clear what those factors are up front so that all bidders know going in that they will be held to the same standard as every other bidder. So this is important legislation. I believe it has strong support. And colleagues, I look forward to the discussion about this important topic, and the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Campos, you asked to be re-referred.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I just wanted to make a point that I actually failed to make as I was introducing my ordinance declaring a state of emergency on homelessness here in San Francisco. I think it's really important that as this is happening, that you have the work that's being done by Supervisor Kim, along with President Breed and Supervisor Cohen. To the extent that we're going to be able to solve this, it will require more than just city government to act. It will require state and federal government to act. But I think it's important, if we do succeed in getting the state of California to act, that we also enhance our standing relative to other jurisdictions. There are other jurisdictions like the city of Los Angeles that have actually declared a state of emergency. And I think the declaration of emergency here in San Francisco puts us in good footing in terms of our ability to actually be priority when it comes to the funding that is provided by the state of California or the federal government. So I want to thank Supervisor Kim and her staff for the work they're doing, because I think that's a very critical component, and I just think it's important to make that note. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Madam President.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. At this time, can we please read public comment?
The public may now address the entire Board of Supervisors for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Board, to include the items on the adoption without reference to committee calendar and the minutes. The public is not allowed to comment when an item has previously been subject to public comment at a Board committee. Pursuant to the Board's rules of order, please direct your remarks to the Board as a whole and not to individual supervisors, and nor to the audience. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify, and if you would like to display a document on the overhead projector, please clearly state such to SFG TV and then remove the document when you would like the screen to return to live coverage of the meeting.
Thank you. First speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The cultivation and pathways of heavenly heart and bodily virtues should reflect the inner connection of true self-nature in unity for bright understanding and good reasoning in ultimate principles. Self-observance and expression of personal nature with disciplines can lead on the worldly people in accordance to heavenly destiny of holiness, having true joyfulness in daily pathways. The unity of political economics and religious education in activities and studies of principles should well be in good support of timely trends of everything come to realization for a local response. So human civilization would progress step by step along accordingly with prosperity. One's analysis of critical reasoning of self-nature in mind should go without any alienation and prejudice for quick demand of holy way. With good disciplines, one could well be stable. Then one's wisdom of intellectual self-nature comes to perfect working order of bright virtues, of good closeness of loving ones, of a new of our people, of achieving the state of perfect wellness. One's upright in heart and personal cultivation should gain great success in understanding of the true way and maintain the worldly people with perfect virtues. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
SFG TV, I have graphics. I was sorry to hear about Nancy Reagan dying, so there it is. You see that? Yeah, oops. Yeah, she wrote to Walter Paulson. You could see there, Nancy and Ronald Reagan. Yeah, she wrote the to Walter Paulson, and yeah, I used to write Ron Reagan many years ago, his son, and he used to send me Christmas cards and letters. And I got a letter with typed letter from both of them. With this one, a typed letter, and a note from Nancy with this one. So too bad about Nancy. Sorry about Nancy Reagan dying. In all the city, all the Leaves are brown and the sky is gray. I went for a walk on a winter's day. If they can't afford here, they might leave today. California dreaming on such a winter's day. And I stopped into City Hall. I passed along the way. Well, they like to do lots of prayers, and they begin to pray. You know, the city likes to coax, city likes to coax, and they'd like to affordably stay. But California dreaming on such a winter's day, on such a winter's day. And if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to look for affordable housing there. If you're going to San Francisco, and you'll meet some friendly people there. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Magic, and in honor of Mother Earth, this is the way I'm celebrating International Women's Day, that we may all live to see the day when the lie that we own the earth will never be spoken again, that we will no longer allow the enslavement of the earth, of humans, or any other species, that we humbly recognize the interdependence of all life, that we inaugurate community agreements about respectful and sustainable use of space, not deeds of ownership, that homes will be a right and a sacred trust. In the future, this time will be remembered as a revolution, revolving around the axis of love, and the unhoused will be honored as those who fearlessly claimed the commons. They were the occupiers of today, that no matter what was done to them, they returned to declare their right to exist, that they were courageous in creating homes out of practically nothing, even when their own government stole their possessions, arrested them for sleeping, and gave them no food, shelter, or even toilets. May we save ourselves by reaching out in every way we can and ending this amoral and immoral system whose priority is always, in the end, about money and power. When we see our brothers and sisters in the streets, may we see them as the leaders that they are toward a compassionate future. Thank you, all of you, for the steps you've made in the right direction today. I'd also like to honor Amy Farrell-Weiss, who did not win mayor, but is acting with the dignity and responsibility towards the homeless as our mayor should today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm inspired to come to this meeting today by what I read in San Francisco Chronicle about the supervisor pushes city to declare a shelter crisis, and part of that was in relation to alcohol and the very uncomfortableness for the community of inebriated elderly people on the streets. And it gets harder and harder the older they get to fix things right so that they do have a healthy lifestyle. But maybe we can prevent the degradation to people in alcoholism by a new approach. The suggestion, is there something? The suggestion in the newspaper was to have wet houses. This has been tried out, as it said in the paper, but it doesn't have enough background of knowledge to it. It isn't that easy. What we need is not so much wet houses, but houses for doing something about alcohol addiction, and that is knowledgeable. I wrote an argument that was published to all the voters in an adjacent county, urban county, and it had why truck drivers drink beer. And it told the kind of thing that we can do to go on present knowledge, but it takes a different kind of audience, or not so much an audience, but a different kind of forum. For instance, maybe Supervisor Campus would have talk with me, and he could tell why his wet houses would work, and I would tell you another way to do it. Let's get people on an expert basis.
Thank you, Mrs. Cross.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
So, we invited the Department of Justice to our city. We did a measly outreach in the Bayview. We're going to have a meeting today at the Mission, where we are going to really speak to the Department of Justice, the DOJ, which I feel should stand for the Department of Jokers. You cannot have an investigation where a review board tells you it's going to take them about 2 years to come up with some type of adjudication, while our young men and others are dying on our streets of San Francisco. So I come here from time to time, and I'm listening to you supervisors. And I know the supervisors that have compassion. And I know the other supervisors who are sellouts, who listen to the developers, take money, and they'll do anything for money. Now, on April the 14th, we shut down City Hall. You know that. Many of the supervisors ran away from these chambers. And it's not impossible for us, without stepping into City Hall, to shut down City Hall. It's not impossible in this digital world. Now, this is not a threat. When we shut down City Hall on April the 14th, we informed everybody, including the mayor, who ran away to Sacramento. We will shut down City Hall without stepping into City Hall. And we will see, and there's a movement now, those supervisors who fail to represent the constituents of San Francisco, we will target you. We will target you. So I walked for Amilcar Perez Lopez. I took my time, but I walked, and I made it. I attended the protest in front of 450 Golden Gate and saw one supervisor, and that was good. So I'm telling you, I'm alive and kicking.
Thank you. I just like to acknowledge who's in the audience joining us today, retired but still hanging around, the former chief of Juvenile Hall, Bill Sifferman. Thank you for being here today with us, Bill. You look very happy since, I guess, retirement is agreeing with you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Sonia Traus. I'm founder of the SF Bay Area Renters Federation. At the February 17th Rules Committee hearing, Peskin and Kim insisted a 25% inclusionary requirement would not kill any projects. If this claim is sincere, don't give away any affordability. Don't exempt any projects from the 25% requirement. Don't grandfather anything in the pipeline. If some projects need to be exempted in order to remain economically feasible, then we have proof that 25% is too high. Some projects will be killed, and the overall amount of affordable housing might go down. So I'm asking the Board of Supervisors to vote against any grandfathering of projects, if that comes before you before the 19th. If we see you vote for grandfathering, we'll know that backroom deals are being made between supervisors and developers who are seeking relief from the new 25% requirements. What do developers have to offer? In exchange for grandfathering, exempted developers will agree to not oppose the ballot measure. Developers will save their immediate projects, but future projects made infeasible by the new 25% requirement will never be proposed, and renters and future residents will be thrown under the bus. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Mike Egge. I live in North Beach, and I concur with the previous speaker's remarks. I question cutting a deal with one group of developers over another, particularly when the apparent criteria for that one over the other is where they stand in the development pipeline. Now, regardless of what anyone came to a conclusion of about the feasibility of the coming measure, it's highly likely that the 25% requirement is going to kill some projects. And I would put to you that the projects that would be killed by that requirement are among the projects that we need the most. Projects with tight schedules, projects with limited budgets. Because those are the projects that are most likely to filter over time, the most likely to become affordable over successive years to working people, years after they've been built. But they won't get built if this deal goes through. Moreover, I would put to you that we should not be basing our goals for affordable housing on what percentages we can exact from developers. We should be making a goal based on the number of units that we need and can create. Because otherwise, if you base it simply on percentages and come up with further punitive answers, we're not going to get market rate projects built, and we aren't going to get the affordable housing either. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Supervisors. My name is John Schwark. I'm also with the San Francisco Bay Area Renters Federation. I was happy to see some CO2 emission items coming up today. I'm here to ask that the Board of Supervisors draft and pass a resolution to study code changes to incentivize cross-laminated timber construction in San Francisco. Cross-laminated timber construction uses super strong advanced particle board beams made from sustainable forests to replace steel beams or concrete and rebar in large mid-rise and small high-rise construction. Why is this important? In concrete rebar construction, around 50% of the total greenhouse gas emissions that come from a building over the course of its lifetime come from the concrete used at the time of construction. We will build hundreds of 100,000 or more units over the next century in San Francisco of the mid-rise and small high-rise density where cross-laminated timber could be used. We can significantly reduce the emissions generated by these buildings and the city as a whole. In fact, cross-laminated timber buildings actually store carbon in their frames, keeping it from being lost into the atmosphere over that 100-year critical timeline where global warming could really hurt us. The professional information you can find on the internet is very encouraging. Buildings made of cross-laminated timber are rising up to 20 stories in Austria and Scandinavia. Vancouver, Portland, and Seattle also have projects planned and code changes. San Francisco should be following closely behind so that they succeed without major problems, technical problems. We can start using cross-laminated timber as well. The largest obstruction is that it's relatively new technology, not accounted for in building codes, and also just the inertia of the construction industry, which is used to working with concrete. Here's the thing. The price of concrete is 30% higher this year than it was last year, one developer told me, and it was already high due to higher than historical levels of housing construction. In this environment, cross-laminated timber reduces housing costs. We can use those reduced housing costs either to make sure more housing gets built with the same amount of money, or to ask.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Tom Gilberti, in deference to Nancy Reagan on this honoring Women's Day, she existed a woman in a man's world, in a man's group. I tip my hat to her. Down the peninsula, a 97-year-old woman has just also died. After living in our house for 60 some odd years, or somewhere around there, she was being evicted during this. And in my world, you've seen this, the overhead, please. 80-year-old woman on her last day in the apartment. I've shown you this before. Her rent increase was $600. She lived with her 55-year-old daughter. 10 months later, she had a stroke. We need to do better with our housing. Times have changed. I hear the state and feds are being involved in the solution to our new housing, but I don't think so. I think nobody's mentioning the private sector very much. And overhead again. This was submitted originally, a housing plan of 5 points. The fifth point is a formula, again, for what we need each development to have. And what we need each development to have is a certain amount of homes for the homeless, low income, foster kids. Navigation systems need homes. Whether this can be built or can't be built, this can be built. If we asked architects around the world to build what we need and require on each property, I believe architects will say we can do it, and we should. We need a change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker. Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Madam Clerk, if you could please read the without reference to committee items.
Yes, items 30 through 32 are being considered for immediate adoption without committee reference. A single roll call vote may enact these items. A member may object and sever an item and have it considered separately.
Before we have that read, colleagues, does anyone want to sever an item on the immediate adoption calendar? Yes, Supervisor Tang.
Item 31, please.
Item 31, Supervisor Avalos.
Item 30, please.
Item 30. On the remainder items, can we have same house, same call? Same house, same call. Items pass without objection unanimously.
That was item 32.
32. On item 30, please.
Item 30, resolution to declare March 2016 as National Social Work Month in the city and calling upon all citizens to join with the National Association of Social Work to celebrate and to support the social work profession.
Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you. As Supervisor Campos often says, as a lawyer, I do this, and I'm actually a social worker. I got my master's in social work from San Francisco State University. So as a social worker, I really believe the city should be doing everything it can to empower its residents to take part in civic life and determine the future of our city and how our city renders its resources. That was part of my effort as a social worker to help explore how we could build this kind of empowerment, and led me to becoming a supervisor. Today we have from the National Association of Social Workers a resolution before us to declare March 2016 National Social Worker Month, and would love your support for this resolution. Thank you, colleagues.
Okay. Which item are we on?
Item 30.
Oh, great. Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 31 is a resolution to oppose Golden Gate National Recreation Area's proposed rule relating to on and off leash dog walking in urban parklands throughout San Francisco, Marin, and San Mateo counties.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I would just like to request that we continue this item for 1 week.
Okay, so Supervisor Tang has asked that we continue this item for 1 week to the meeting of March 15, 2016, seconded by Supervisor Avalos. Colleagues, can we take it without objection? Without objection, this item is continued. All right, Madam Clerk, can we go to the next item?
We have two imperative items, Madam President. The first is offered by Supervisor Peskin, a resolution declaring Saturday, March 12, 2016, as Russell J. Gumina Day in the City and County of San Francisco.
Okay. Supervisor Peskin?
I'd like to move purely commendatory and Brown Act findings.
All right. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Tang. Colleagues, can we take this without objection? Without objection, this motion is approved. Okay, do you want to talk about the item, or would you like me to open it up to public comment?
Madam President, I spoke about it during my roll call and I have no further comment.
Okay, so for the imperative item, is there any member of the public who'd like to comment on this item? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, can we take the item, same house, same call? Without objection, the imperative item passes unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please read the next imperative item?
Yes, on behalf of Supervisor Marr, a resolution declaring March 9th, 2016 to be Tyrus Wong Day in the City and County of San Francisco.
Okay, did you circulate copies of that?
Yes.
I don't have a copy.
So it was circulated, so.
Okay, thank you.
So I move that this is purely commendatory and meets the requirements of the Brown Act to declare March 9th, 2016 as Tyrus Wong Day in San Francisco.
Okay, so that was moved by Supervisor Marr, seconded by Supervisor Avalos. Can we take that without objection? Without objection, that passes.
And President Breed, I did want to say that honoring this 105-year-old man, Tyrus Wong, is not only important for the CAMFest, the Asian American Film Festival, and the Asian Art Museum, which will have a major painting he did 80 years ago on display on Thursday all day. It's a unusual painting. It's a Chinese Jesus that he did over 80 years ago, but it'll be on display for only one day. And at 4 p.m., some of us are gathering to honor Mr. Tyrus Wong. I just wanted to say that his influence isn't acknowledged hardly at all, but he's the artist that did the brush style animation from Bambi, for those of you that have seen the Disney films. But he's also influenced many of the animators throughout our history and all the way up until Pixar today and many other animators. Though he lives in Los Angeles, he immigrated to the U.S. through Angel Island and had an impact as a Depression-era artist and showing his creativity, but also integrating his own Asian American culture into what he did, influencing the whole industry. And for Asian Americans, I think it's really important that he's acknowledged, but also just generally for animators and artists. He was the oldest living detainee on Angel Island, and the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation is acknowledging him as well with their Heritage Awards for his life achievements. He was born in Taishan County in Guangdong Province, China, like my family was, and he immigrated to the U.S. through Angel Island like my dad did. At the age of 9, though, my dad was maybe a couple of years old when he came through Angel Island. But over the course of Tyrus Wong's career, he worked on Bambi, but also films like The Wild Bunch and Rebel Without a Cause. And he's a living artistic treasure and pioneering icon, not just for Asian Americans, but for all artists. As I mentioned, CAMFest is honoring him by screening a documentary on his life as kicking off the festival on March 10th. And it's opening night where the 105-year-old Tyrus Wong will be there. And again, Thursday is when they'll have the Chinese Jesus. It's a unusual painting. I just showed it to Supervisor Yi, but it's worth checking out. And it's at the Asian Art Museum on Thursday. But again, the Mr. Wong, 105 years old, will be at the CAMFest opening on March 10th. Anyone wanting more information, cammedia.org. I urge your support.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Marr. This item is now available for public comment. Are there any members of the public who'd like to comment on this specific item? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, can we take the item, same house, same call? Without objection, the imperative item passes unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please read the in memoriams?
Yes, Madam President. On behalf of Supervisor Peskin, for the late Mrs. Ann Hunt, and on behalf of you, President Breed, for the late Mr. Chris Carpenter.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there any other items before us?
That concludes our business for today.
Colleagues, thank you for being here today. We are adjourned.